2019 midterm elections have passed. Winners in the local races have been proclaimed, while official canvassing continues in the national level with partial and unofficial counts almost at 100%. But before we all got here, there was a grueling campaign that the aspirants had to go through, from walking under the heat of the sun to sifting to all the streets just to etch their names in the minds of the voters. Thanks to today's technology, campaigning was not limited to going out, as candidates could also go online. With many Filipinos now glued to their phones, social media can indeed be a tool to expand one's reach. But the question is, does it necessarily translate to votes? Let's dissect this on today's agenda.
Sorry, I changed my mind. Today we're going to talk about crisis management because apparently the COMELEC and our electoral process of 2019 is having a crisis. We have a crisis of confidence, a crisis of intelligence, a crisis of credibility. And that's on today's agenda, Crisis 101, how to deal with a crisis. I'm Cito Beltran and we are OneNews.
Today's question: what kind of role does social media play in an election? Send us some TLC, tweets, likes, and comments. Connect with us on Facebook and Twitter at OneNewsPH and use the hashtag agenda on Signal TV.
Okay, today we're going to be talking all about crisis management, particularly managing the crisis that the COMELEC created with their failed transparency server. Let's get to know our guest who specializes in crisis management.
Prominent name in public relations, Amor Maclang is a globally awarded brand architect and a marketing communications innovator, among others. She founded GeiserMaclang Marketing Communications Incorporated, one of the top PR firms in the country. Maclang is currently a reputation surrogate chairman, Philippine Association for Digital Commerce and Decentralized Industries. She studied political science, international relations, and governance at the Ateneo de Manila University.
While everybody wants to talk about the run-of-the-mill topics, no one seems to be paying attention on what's on the papers. NAMFREL to COMELEC, NAMFREL telling COMELEC transmit 1 million votes. And then the spokesperson of the COMELEC saying suspension of senatorial proclamation ruled out. So apparently people are already talking about suspending the proclamation until we are all clear what exactly happened during that 8-hour blackout, information blackout from the COMELEC. So today let's talk about figuring out when do you have a crisis, how do we say that the COMELEC has a crisis? Amor, welcome to the program.
Yes, good morning, Cito.
Okay, you and I have done a lot of crisis management work, but I find it striking that no one wants to recognize the fact that there is a crisis.
Yes. You know, very good that you pointed that out. Since we were together last Monday, was it? I really haven't been able to sleep, and I think it was during the show itself, during the Epiphany, and I wasn't even planning to raise it. I was so bothered and anxious about all the perceived failings in terms of the experience, the voting, and as you said, no, the cumulative lack of confidence towards the COMELEC. And now the headlines are confronting us. You said something important, which is, how come no one's recognizing it? Amor, are we the only two people who are seeing it? that's the curse and the responsibility if you are in risk issues and crisis management. Because our culture in general as Filipinos, and as evidenced by, say, cultural sayings like bahala na, bathala na, or even our Muslim inshada.
Or bahala na si Batman.
Or bahala na si Batman, right? It's all about, you know what, better you don't talk about the crisis because, or don't talk about the problems because it might happen. So what that creates is a prevailing culture wherein we tend to ignore what could potentially escalate into a negative in the hope that it won't happen. So now,
well, it has happened.
Exactly.
Because now NAMFREL wants, is, basically butting heads already with the COMELEC. And then the Senate, by the way, I forgot to mention this on the front page of the Philippine Star, they've scheduled the investigation of this electoral process on June 4.
Yes.
Now, one of the prominent things I've seen is that the commissioners have gone from being, what's the term for that when you don't really want to be particular, specific,
you're so evasive.
Yeah, you're so evasive. And then from evasive, they have become combative.
Yes,
and I
defensive.
Defensive and combative.
Yes.
Yesterday, I saw one of the commissioners screaming at the lawyer, and I was going, okay, that's it. That's the red flag. That's the the yellow flag that you're already committing a foul.
Yes.
Now, okay. So why is it that you said Filipinos culturally don't want to recognize?
And it's not just Filipinos or politicians. It's even big corporations, right? And the thing about what you mentioned is, I think what people, the public, you and I are decrying is the abject lack of transparency.
Okay.
See,
which is ironic, okay, right? Because what caused all of this is the transparency server, which they had set up to give to media, and when it failed, there was utterly no transparency about the failure.
The machine is only one aspect of it. I think what we are both really decrying is that mindset, the lack of transparency mindset. Because what is the role of the COMELEC? Number one, it's not just to manage the conduct of the elections. I was really reflecting on what you were saying. It's about engagement, not just governance. So if you're talking about engagement, that includes things like educating the public and not just how to use or shade the ballot. I'm like, come on, really?
Yeah.
It includes even things like how to educate on the right choices, right? Your precincts, taking care of the customer experience.
To be fair to the COMELEC, they seem to have done okay job compared to the past year.
Not enough.
Okay, not enough, but they did do a good job. But it was when the technical glitches started to happen. That's when suddenly, close the curtain.
Correct.
It's like you're in economy watching first class or business class, and then they pull the curtain. It's like,
and they don't say anything.
They don't say anything.
Yes.
What's going on? What are they serving? What are they doing?
That's correct. Now, like I said, in an era of social media, never has there been a time when, what's the word? Really radical transparency has been required of everyone, especially government officials and government offices. In the case of an issue escalating into a crisis, the rule of the game is to over-communicate. In other words, keep your cool, and you need to over-communicate. In other words, you need to continue to update your stakeholders, the public in general, as to what's happening. Even the good, the bad, and the ugly, especially the ugly. So if something is amiss and you are experiencing problems, the public would want us to actually break it down for them. What's happening? What is a Java error? What is denial of service? Because our role in an issue and a crisis scenario is to assure the public that we're in control. Now, even when we don't know what's actually happening, the mere fact that you're going out of your way to explain to the public, then you're doing your job. The problem is, we hear a spokesperson, we don't even hear who's eventually accountable.
Okay, that became an issue in the last 24 hours. People started saying, James Jimenez was fed to the lions. because people, especially in media, were saying, why is it that it was only James Jimenez who's talking, and he's not even a commissioner? So that's one. Then the commissioners came out in force the day after all of that happened, and they started doing tech jargon, tech talk, etc. And here's the question: how come they did that? Why is it that way? When there's a crisis, not all the guilty parties are presented. Because, well, maybe this is unfair advantage on my part.
But that's what I love about you. You provoke. So.
You know, but here's the thing. You have James Jimenez way out in the open, over talking already. Then suddenly, too late in the game, the commissioners come out. But then, where are the suppliers? Not a single supplier was there. There were no, you know, there was no person.
Yes.
Now, let's do the 101, Crisis 101. How would you analyze this? Because I think the first question is, when should the COMELEC have realized that they had a crisis?
Yes. Okay. The first flag, and we were together when it was happening, was when someone as high profile as VP Binay calls for was it in the short span of time we were together?
Yeah.
We called for 4 media briefings, right? And he was obviously fanning the flames and making it into an issue, and not without good cause. In other words, right, him raising it is probably a symptom of many others who are experiencing the same. In the case of an issue and a crisis situation, number one, there should be one person in charge, and a separate person should be the spokesperson. But you cannot put the PR person, the spokesperson, in front of the camera, especially when the proverbial SHIT hits the fan, right? You absolutely cannot do that. And I love what you said about how come the technical people, aka the suppliers, were not there to help explain, right?
Yeah.
Especially because they're attributing a lot of the issues to technological glitch. And our commissioners, you know, bless their souls, no matter how potentially proficient they are, will not be the best people to explain what's happening. But this also goes back to what we discussed last Monday, which is how come the reaction is all very reactive? Everything is very reactive. They should have war roomed these scenarios from the get-go. I mean, this is not the first time that we're experiencing things like missed voter identification, technical glitch. That should have been war roomed even 6 months prior.
Okay, so that would be a lesson to the leaders, politicians, COMELEC officials, businessmen, that don't assume life is perfect and everything will run smoothly.
It's only a function of when, because that proverbial problem will always happen, just a function of when. So you can't say, oh, you know what, let's pray, hope for the best. It's not going to happen.
It's not if, but when it happens.
That's right.
So you need to practice, and you need to keep practicing for something that you hope will never happen.
Exactly.
But that's, you know, a mindset requirement. So we'll go for a break. When we come back, trying to figure out when to identify you have a crisis, what are the first steps in doing crisis management, particularly in the experience of the COMELEC. We'll be right back here on Agenda. Okay, you're watching Agenda, and our topic for today, Crisis 101, Crisis Management 101, in relation to our experience with the election. And you know, you were saying more about we were talking about mindset, that in the Philippines, we really don't have that mentality of expecting problems. When problems,
preparing for them,
we dwell on our problems, but we never anticipate problems.
So telenovela mentality, right? I think part of me feels that we enjoy the drama and makes us feel important, right? But part of what we need to do is really anticipatory. We call it generative. It's not even proactive. It has to be generative.
What do you mean by generative? Because that's one of those, you young people, you keep coming up with this redefinition of terms.
Yes. It's a level higher than proactive, because when you're proactive, you probably prepare for it 2 months in advance or 6 months in advance, but when you're generative, you anticipate it's going to happen. It's part of your business planning, right? So, in the case of the COMELEC, I wonder when they took over, did they even do a business continuity program, right? Meaning, they know that failures will and could happen. How do we war room those various scenarios? What do we say? Dapat lahat yan dekahon. You don't prepare for a statement or the step-by-step as it happens. You should have prepared that, locked away, so the thing that you have to do is just open the key and take out the files and just run by the playbook.
Well, you're saying something quite interesting, and I hope there are a couple of senators watching who will be conducting the investigation. Because at this stage, given the the certainty that elections will happen every 3 years.
Exactly, right? Exactly.
Then the COMELEC has to be run like a corporation.
Correct.
It should not be run like a government agency, all this. Well, anyway, okay, so run it like a business, okay? Be generative. In generative, I gather that, when you are doing the models, constantly change in anticipation of new things.
Iterate, rehearse, war room it. Actually, the term that we use is, we need to war room it. In other words, you have to go through the motions. What if something like this happens? How do you react? What do we say? So you're absolutely right. It's all about practice. Expertise is all about practice.
When you're as big and as responsible for a nation and its election, then you cannot not have crisis management program. You cannot have get away without having a crisis manager.
Absolutely.
And you were saying that the crisis manager is separate from the spokesperson.
Separate from the spokesperson and cannot be embedded in the organization. Okay?
Must be separate and distinct.
And I'll tell you why, okay? Because while they might be the experts in the electoral process, the one thing that an external advisor will always have as an advantage is objectivity. Because what will kill you in a crisis is not the crisis, ironically, but it's your love of the brand. It's your love for your organization. You pointed out something earlier, when a commissioner started shouting at a lawyer, you know that they've lost it. Because once, where they're coming from is, you are attacking something that's important to me, which is my integrity, my organization. So if you do that, the general reaction of the organization is to be defensive. But when you are defensive, to the public externally, it looks like you have something to hide.
Or you're being arrogant.
Or you're being arrogant, in which case that is not a good position to be, right? So it bothers me that they will lose their cool in public, given the fact that what they need to be, whether or not they're at fault, because this is not a function of, are you technically at fault or not? No. It's how you are received by the public and how you assure the public that you have everything under control, even despite the fact that you're going through a crisis.
Okay. Now, so you're saying a person has to be separate, because I'm trying to remember, reviewing all of my clients through crisis management. I remember one scenario where we sat in a room for like 45 minutes and everybody kept talking about, well, they're going to do this, well, they're going to do that. It was like, scenario generation. And then the CEO from another country, well, we were on a phone conference, teleconference, and he said, I'd like to hear Mr. Beltran's view. I said, well, listening to everyone here, I can tell you that you have a problem, but you don't have a crisis. Can we now have lunch?
Yes.
And, he said, that's the smartest thing we've ever heard. But
I like it.
How is it that people can't, differentiate?
Okay.
How do we differentiate? When did you know, as far as you're concerned, I have a different view. How did you know, or when did you know that COMELEC had a crisis in their hands?
Yes. Okay, let's go back first to maybe three concepts. If there's only one thing that the audience can take away from what I'm saying, three things. How do you differentiate between a risk, issues, and crisis, right? Because, and this is very critical because, you know, it will also apply to your daily life. A risk is when you are born into a family of diabetics, right? There's nothing that you can do about it. Genetically, you have the propensity for diabetes. Even if you disown your parents, it's there. That's a risk.
Okay.
Now, if despite that risk, you continue to eat your sugar, not exercise, etc., then it escalates into a type 2 diabetes scenario. Then the risk has now escalated into an issue. But it's not yet a crisis because it's not yet life-threatening.
Okay.
But now, when the type 2 diabetes diagnosis escalates into dialysis and you're given a prognosis, you have 6 months to live,
And you
then all of a
have to
sudden,
cut off your leg.
you have to cut off your leg and
Yeah.
impair your quality of life, then all of a sudden that becomes a crisis. Now, how does that translate to our scenario here with the COMELEC? While there is no immediate death, no, knock on wood, or no one is being fired yet, the fact that there are even calls for failures, non-declaration, non-proclamation, basically casting in doubt the integrity of what happened last Monday, is serious cause for concern. Because what if, what if there was even the possibility that the election results are fair and good? Just that possibility that the public can cast aspersions on what could otherwise have been a credible output already puts the process in question, and that should bother the COMELEC, right? Look, NAMFEL is not the official counting partner. I think it's Lente.
Lente,
right?
yeah.
Lente.
And also, I think indirect partner is the
PPCRV.
Yeah.
Number one, obviously the COMELEC, obviously there's some tension, right, to be polite about it, between the NAMFEL and the COMELEC, because the NAMFEL obviously is a stakeholder, albeit a former stakeholder. There should have been close coordination, even if there's no official relationship. I doubt if the COMELEC worked and engaged NAMFEL, because otherwise
NAMFEL said we don't want to have anything to do with it.
Can you imagine? That cannot be. That absolutely cannot be. Prior to going into the election, 6 months, what they should have probably done is come up with scenario, stakeholder scenario, identified who are the important stakeholders who can speak in our behalf, not against us.
Yeah, but you know, we're doing paralysis by analysis here. Okay, let's try to think like a COMELEC commissioner.
Okay, now.
Okay,
so crisis mode now.
Okay, so, you know, shit's hit the fan. Now they're all wondering, you know, what do we do? But they seem to be doing pocket remedies. But when are people supposed to? You made that analogy of diabetes, but in the experience of COMELEC regarding this 20, when did they have a crisis in their hands, as far as you're concerned?
Once, okay. The one red flag should be when the news on social media and also on traditional media started focusing on the inefficiencies, right? The thing about the COMELEC is they're supposed to not just provide a soothing and a comforting image, they should actually be in the back end, no? I mean, they shouldn't be the news, right? But in this case, they're becoming the centerpiece of the news, right? So, like I said, hour 1, hour 2, when someone as high profile as former VP Binay started pointing to their inefficiency, then they should have already alerted the sound bells and put their crisis plan in motion, what to say, etc. One of the things that I would have probably done was to set up either a channel online, give updates, provide explanatory notes, because the best way to assure the public and your stakeholders is to be constantly available.
What about complete, again, this stupid, I don't know, I would...
No, I feel you.
I call it stupid word transparency.
Yeah.
Because, you know, my thought would have been, you know, from the morning, from the very hour that former VP Binay started complaining about the server, they should have started monitoring how many servers are crashing or malfunctioning, and they should have been transparent. We're experiencing problems.
And the technical expert should be beside either the chairperson or the spokesperson, providing the technical blow-by-blow.
Yeah, because it took more than, I think, 15 hours before the word SD cards came out. So what in terms of crisis management, is full transparency a good idea? Like I was saying, okay, we've had 100 SD cards down. Okay, 12 noon, we already have 200 SD cards down. 6 o'clock, we have 800 SD cards. Well, you kind of like, make them immune to that reality.
No, absolutely. We need to constantly update and give them the good, the bad, and the ugly. Because if you're assuming that, oh, you know what, if I keep this secret, then maybe it won't come out, that's not going to happen. That very one thing that you think will not come out is precisely what you need to plan for if it breaks, right? So what I would have probably suggested, the idea that we're even talking about SD cards, right? In an era of technology, blockchain, decentralization, I'm totally stunned by that. Yes, they need to have illustrations, they need to have explainer videos, but those things you cannot do as it's unfolding. They should have prepared for that in advance. Parang play, okay, this is the role of the SD card.
Ironically, it's not the first time it happened. Precisely. It happened in 2016, so they should have anticipated it. Okay, in my case, I realized that they had a crisis situation, a serious crisis situation, by 11:30 p.m. or 12 midnight, when they could no longer explain what the problem was.
It was like blackout, right? I mean, it reminds you of what happened in 2016 when, and people online were calling for, wag tayong matulog, right? We have to be vigilant.
You said the key word, because here's the part. We asked our reporter, our correspondent at the PICC or at COMELEC, and I said, can you please tell me, are there still any commissioners there? I think this is around 1 o'clock. And he said, well, they actually packed it up already.
Are you serious? Oh my God.
And I'm saying, okay, now you just created a major crisis because the Philippines is waiting for explanation.
The entire country is awake. Then you're going home. How can you even sleep, right?
Yeah. So as when a crisis happens, you said someone should be in charge.
Absolutely.
There should be a team. There should be paraphernalia or logistics explaining. Okay.
And the person in charge has to be there. I mean, do you remember when that fateful AirAsia crash happened? It was Tony Fernandez himself in a white T-shirt, as if he just woke up, right? Who immediately faced the media.
Yeah.
And that is probably one of the most reassuring moments in airline crash history.
And he survived that.
He survived that. I mean, I recently took an AirAsia flight, and we have no qualms about it, right?
Whereas compared to what happened to that Chinese airline that crashed in Naiya, they had to scramble a crisis team together, and the general manager of Naiya got fried for something, and people were saying, well, it shouldn't be the GM fronting for this problem, because it is it's become a major crisis.
Yes, and the thing is, I need everyone to be mindful of preparation, because it's not just their organization that's undermined. Collectively, it's our country's reputation that gets undermined.
Okay, I don't want to over-focus on COMELEC, but that was the jumping point, okay? But for businesses,
or even those who lost.
Okay, who should and what should they be worried about or think about? But who could become potential victims of crisis?
Okay. The first thing that I need, then later we can go back, because I want to talk about what is the end goal of crisis management at the end of the day? It's about business and life continuity,
Okay.
right? So in other words, why do we even undertake this exercise? Is because if we know that a problem will happen, and it's just a matter of time, then we need to ensure that the bridge from your crisis to continuing to being back to normal is as short and as painless as possible.
Or preserving your reputation.
Absolutely.
Or
Absolutely.
keeping your jobs.
Absolutely, absolutely. But I tell them that that should not be your primordial concern. Your primordial concern should be, how do we make sure that everyone gets back to business as usual or life as normal in the shortest time possible? Now, you talked about two things, corporations, and then later we can talk about how about those who lost in the elections, right?
Okay.
Because a lot of them right now are definitely wallowing, but let's maybe talk about later how can they bounce back and continue to be relevant.
Because that in itself is a crisis.
It is.
It is a career crisis.
It is.
When you've spent all of your life working.
And most of your resources, I have to say,
most
and
of your
goodwill.
resources, goodwill, and job, and suddenly you lose in the election.
Absolutely.
So most of the people who lost
They're at a
are
loss.
going through a career crisis.
It's true. And the thing is, if you do not recognize that there are actually steps that you can take, you can wallow in it. And if you wallow in it, then before you know it, the next 9 years, right, which could potentially represent 3 full terms, you have already gone into oblivion. No one cares about you. You're no longer relevant.
We'll go for a break, and when we come back, more discussion on crisis management with Amor Maclang here on Agenda. Okay, just for purposes of transparency, what a funny word.
Yeah.
Okay, I have time and again been a crisis manager for some clients. Unfortunately, in this line of business, you can't even tell who your clients were, or we would have to shoot you.
Exactly.
Okay.
You have to disappear.
Okay. Now going back to, because no one wants to admit they had the crisis, and that I think is the reason why many CEOs and companies undervalue the importance of crisis management and a program.
Yes.
Okay. Now for corporations, okay, what are the potential areas where you could get hit by a crisis?
So one of the things that we require of our partners when we're brought on board is the idea of coming up with a risk registry. So a risk registry basically allows us to do a scrape of what are the top 10, which we then boil down to top 5 crises that can hit you. So it could be from operational, so if you're into manufacturing, or if you are in oil and gas and power, the breakdown of a plant. You absolutely cannot have that. So that's housekeeping.
Or a pipeline erupts or breaks and causes an oil spill.
Absolutely. Second would be in terms of political risks, right? Political, now, this is an interesting discussion. I've recently had this with a major conglomerate into PPPs. Public reputation and reputational risk and political risk, because they're like, no, the reason why we're having all of these stoppage of our rate hikes is because the political environment is uncertain. And I said, sorry, no. The reason for why you're vulnerable to political risk is because you have not taken care of your reputational risk. You are seen as a non-transparent conglomerate. You are seen as someone taking advantage of the people, not engaging the government. Tumatawag lang kayo sa gobyerno pag kailangan nyo sila ngayon. But before, you never took care of Mindanao, etc., etc. So those two things are always tied. It's so easy to point your finger and to blame at the current government when in fact, who I would blame, or although there's really no space in the word for blame in our practice, is the fact that you have not taken care of your reputational, your public reputation over the past few years.
I think the word is not blame, but rather accountability.
Yes, yes.
You should be accountable for your deficits.
Yes.
Because like when you mentioned that corporation with reputation issue, I had a client who covered all areas, and then I just casually asked, what is your relationship with the local government? And they went, duh.
Yes.
I said, do you realize that one relative is a congressman, the other relative is the mayor, the other relative is in the cabinet, or something like that?
That's why I don't think, Cito, people like us will go out of practice because of the advent of AI, right? Because everyone's saying that, you know, technology will replace PR companies and, you know, the traditional media engagement. You're right. If you're commodified, yes. But in terms of analyzing those relationships, right? So what you pointed that out. No amount of AI programming will allow you to try to analyze that. No, but if I may, two more risks that are important.
Be careful with that finger, huh?
Yes.
Okay, everybody seems to be using their finger now.
Exactly, exactly. No, I speak like an Italian. I'd make for a terrible spokesperson.
Okay.
There is also the technology risk, the cyber risk, which clearly is what our current COMELEC is going through. And then, finally, there are environmental sustainability risks. So, in other words, that's where understanding the community, engaging the community comes.
Yeah, what about the risk of ignorance? Because as I analyze, seriously, as I analyze, two stories, as I analyze the COMELEC situation, you said something about the commissioners. They're all old. I mean, relative, in relative terms.
There are generational gaps that are glaring.
They're generationally gapped from technology. Because when they did that press briefing or that press conference, I noticed that they all pointed to the guy who was a tech expert. And I'm saying, okay, problem one here. Only one guy understands what's going on.
I wouldn't have put in all the commissioners there, right, if they had nothing substantial to say.
Exactly. It made it glaring. It basically called attention to the fact that these people don't know much about the technology. So in terms of crisis management, everyone on board needs to understand what the business is all about.
Precisely.
Okay. So
through and through. And you need to not only understand it, you need to be able to explain it to a 2-year-old.
Well, I quoted Albert Einstein, I think, who said that if you cannot explain it simply, you do not understand it completely.
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. And the thing that breaks my heart is they could have prepared for this. It's not like Haiyan that caught us by surprise 5-7 days, right?
Or Typhoon Yolanda.
Haiyan, Typhoon Yolanda, right? We had 7 days to prepare. This is a recurring thing. There is a cadence to it. Every 3 years election happens. So I don't understand why there wasn't much forethought that was put into the planning of possible risk scenarios. Now, you're probably saying, but you know what, Amor, are you asking us to be like gods and to look into the future? Yes, if you're a business leader, a government leader, absolutely, you need to be. And as if we are to take a page from former mayor of New York, Rudy Giuliani, who said, you know, there was nothing in the New York City risk crisis playbook that prepared us for 9/11. But the prior preparations and the training that they've done for other scenarios allowed them to actually bounce back quicker.
Yeah, they prepared for high skyscraper infernos. They prepared for earthquakes. They prepared for terrorist attacks. They prepared for chemical warfare, etc. And I guess the coming of zombies.
Yes.
So they somehow managed during 9/11.
Well, that's funny you said coming of zombies. I thought a conglomerate, risk issues and crisis management, and I used World War Z or a zombie apocalypse as the example, because that's how we need to explain it to people in a manner that's even light, snackable. But anyway, going back to New York, and now in the case of New York, I was recently there a month ago. They even celebrated what happened in 9/11. It's now a point of serious contemplation for them. It's a revered site. It's a tourist destination. They've obviously bounced back. And I don't know if we can say the same for Region 8. I have a very strong affinity for that region. I don't think a lot of them have recovered or really fully bounced back, right?
From the damage.
And it's actually been a major cause of electoral concern that continued to hound, and I will not say who na lang, one of the senatoriables who ran for president 3 years ago and was largely blamed for what happened in Tacloban and in Leyte. I think that's one of the reasons why he didn't place.
You know, I find that interesting because, you know, in a crisis, the wrong person taking the job could end up becoming the sacrificial lamb. Because I remember in the Clinton, who was his vice president? Al Gore, was it? Clinton. When Clinton had that scandal with Monica Lewinsky, okay, Al Gore was expected to step up and basically wave his finger of morality at Clinton and say, "You done wrong, brother." But he didn't, and it cost him his political career. I mean, he never recovered. You were talking about Mar Rojas.
Your words, not mine.
No, seriously. I mean, we have to be fair.
Yes.
Mar Rojas went to Tacloban. He went there representing the government. No one could have prepared for Hayan, for Yolanda, but he took the spot. Unfortunately, he took a spot where he was representing Pinoy, Noynoy Aquino, and when that did not pan out to everyone's content, it was Mar Rojas who got crucified and continues to be crucified. So in one way, I guess I'm just pointing out to our viewers and the officials and the businessmen there that just, you know, even the people like James Jimenez, for instance, he's the one who stepped up, been talking, and I heard that here on the studio, he got so harassed, so fed up, that he became, you know, he lost it a bit and said, well, if you think you can do a better job, why don't you do it? Yeah. You know, and then you have another commissioner going, you know, ballistic on someone. And what happens is the wrong person stepping up in a crisis could end up being crucified and doesn't add value to the solution.
And you don't have to be that wrong person. That's exactly what we're trying to train here. No one is ever born to manage a crisis. Our entire physiological programming is directed towards the preservation of life. What do I mean by this? If you hear an explosion, what is your default? Our default is to cower under the table, cower into a fetus position to protect our internal organs. But if you are a crisis manager, the wiring will have to be different. If you hear an explosion, the first thing you do is go to the origin of the explosion. Because you need to be on ground, you need to understand what's happening. So no one is ever born the right person. Everyone can be trained to be the right person. So that's why I really shake my head, right? You know, I cry at times when I see some of the most brilliant, some of the most important people in business, in government, in society really crumple because of lack of preparedness. Okay, so it's not because they're not good, it's because they didn't prepare for it, and anyone could.
Okay, we'll go for a break, and when we come back, we continue on Crisis Management 101 here on Agenda.
Searching a place for your gastronomic feast? Search no more.
Food is amazing.
Discover off-the-grid eateries that will fill your bellies with delight.
And
and bringing that celebration from the kitchen to your table.
What are you waiting for? Let's eat. Let's Eat, Mondays, 7 p.m. Catch it here on OneNews.
Okay, you're watching the last module for today's class on Crisis Management 101. So we've already covered most of the topics, okay, how to identify a crisis. If it's just a problem, you can solve it at your level. If it's a crisis, it could be burning your house down, crashing your business, or threatening your life. Or in the case of the COMELEC, it has threaten the sanctity or the integrity of the election and actually their credibility as commissioners and the institution itself. Now, we also discussed with Amor. Amor pointed out that you cannot be part of the crisis team if you are part of those who created the crisis. Yes. That's a rule. And then also get someone from the outside who can be very objective and, just like me, very critical and very unforgiving, because you need to take the emotion out of the crisis and you simply need to identify where did we screw up and how badly did we screw up. And then finally you have to have a program in place that has been in there for the last 6 months at very least, and it should be something that is a continuing process of development and preparation. Well, now, Amor, you mentioned earlier that even the losing candidates in this election are probably going through a crisis. That's not just a personal crisis, but a real crisis. It can be a career crisis, a business crisis,
a life chart crisis, right? Imagine if you've poured in all of your resources, your time, your effort, and especially the goodwill that you had to burn through, right? The past elections, and you lost, and what do you do? I know that a lot of the politicians right now are probably at in a quandary, at a loss as to what to do, but I need you immediately to snap out of it. I'll give you 2-3 days to wallow, drink yourself silly, cry, but then what you need to do is pick up, realize that this could be a crisis that only you can take yourself out of, and start planning for the next 3 years.
Hold that thought. There's the problem. Most of them did not plan on losing. They did not consider that what if we lose. See, and I think that goes back to what we said earlier.
That's right.
Every business model needs to prepare 6 months in advance for the possibility that someone could pull the rug from under you.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And this goes back to another point as to why you need an objective third party to help identify that for you. Let me point out the idea of villain self-identification. What do I mean by that? In the story of all our lives, tayo lagi yung bida, di ba? Hindi naman pwede na tayo. But what if you are the villain in the story, right? What if you are the one that did wrong? Are you objective enough, or is anyone within your cordon sanitaire objective enough to say, you know what, sir, ma'am, you're the villain. What are you going to do about it? Look, in the case, for example, of the city of Pasig, I'm not saying one is a villain, one is, an angel, but at least social media is painting someone out to be the hero and the other to be a villain. And I will not name names. So if you are being seen as the villain, you cannot continue to perpetuate that by calling on electoral fraud. If I were in the losing camp in Pasig, I will regroup. I will talk to my family, process it properly. Now, what do we do to recover? How do we continue to be relevant? Because actually, the worst crisis that can hit a politician right now is if you're forgotten. If you become irrelevant. If you become irrelevant. If you think you have it bad that you lost, no. The worst thing is if in 3 years, 6 years, 9 years, your constituents don't even remember you. So as early as now, you need to prepare for your business continuity program. How do you continue to be relevant so that you have a better than average chance of winning in 3 years?
Okay, so, but that doesn't, it's not limited to just politicians.
No.
I mean, there are wives, husbands. Seriously, I know people who just fall apart. Their husband leaves or their wife leaves them, and they don't know what to do. It's like the end of the world. But recently, I know a friend who got divorced. Okay, and she said, I packed my bags and sent them off to California, and essentially, I brought my kids, and I'm starting all over. She never banked on just this relationship or this marriage is my life or this job is my life. It's like never assume that it's forever. Walang forever sa buhay. Pati kayo mamamatay.
Ang galing nung story, nung kwentuhan natin. Because do you know that the manifestations of a crisis is actually very similar to the manifestations of when you're in love? Panic sets in, there's lack of information, you get defensive, right? So it's telling you,
it becomes personal.
It is.
And that's the worst thing in a crisis.
When I said earlier, what hits you in a crisis, what kills you is not the crisis, but it's love. It's so beautiful that you brought it back and you circled back to the fact of your divorced friend. Because being in a crisis and being in love is actually very similar. The manifestations, it's hard to distinguish one from the other, but at the end of the day, cooler and more objective heads really need to prevail. So it's interesting you said that.
Okay, so what would be your parting words for our viewers, whether it's in their life or business or careers or politics or government such as the COMELEC?
Number one is when you go into any kind of undertaking, you have to assume that something will go wrong. It should be part of your KPIs. It should be part of your business plan to have a business continuity program, right? Because there's always the 50-50%, there's always the 50% chance that it's not going to go in your favor. And if you are prepared for the worst that can happen, then how bad could it ever be when it finally happens? So it's all about preparedness. Unpreparedness is the new unsustainable in business. So in an era where the new normal is crisis, right? And it could be a typhoon, it could be an earthquake.
Yeah, this is a decade of disruptions.
Precisely, technological, environmental, everything. How can you not be prepared? How can you, in good conscience, face your stakeholders, your shareholders, and not be prepared?
Okay. Well, I think that's about all the time we have. Thank you, Amor, and I'm sure we're going to have more of these discussions because of the disruptive nature of technology and the ill-prepared management attitudes of people. And that was your first look at the day's agenda. Just to add on to what Amor has said, number one, you have to be a risk taker. You have to be, when you see there's a problem, you have choices. And sometimes we don't want to take risks or we won't take the bitter pill. Sometimes taking the bitter pill will actually be the best medicine. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook and Twitter at OneNews PH. I'm Cito Beltran. We are OneNews.